Dust swirled across the small frontier town of Dry Creek as the sun bled over the horizon. The crowd outside the saloon was already restless, voices rising with laughter and whiskey. Inside, a wooden sign read, "Marriage lottery, $5 a ticket. Winner gets a bride." Tobias Crow stood in the corner, hat low, boots coated with trail dust. He hadn't planned on being here. 3 years of hard work on a ranch had earned him little more than silence and scars. But $5 was a small price for something different, even if it was foolish. "Last ticket, mister," the bartender said, waving a stub of paper. Tobias reached into his coat. "I'll take it," he muttered. The crowd erupted when the drawing began. A sheriff's deputy spun a tin drum, pulled a slip, and read the name aloud. "Winner is Tobias Crow." Laughter filled the room. "Lucky bastard," someone yelled. "Hope she ain't got a beard." The doors creaked open. Everyone turned. A tall shadow filled the frame, a woman, proud and broad-shouldered, her eyes sharp as a hawk's. Her skin caught the light of the setting sun. Deep bronze, marked by wind and strength. She wore leather bands on her arms and stood a full head taller than Tobias. The saloon went silent. Then came the whispers. "Apache. She's one of them." "Lord help him." Tobias froze. The woman, Atsa, didn't flinch. She stepped forward, gaze steady, meeting his eyes without fear. The sheriff cleared his throat. "By law of this county, this woman is yours. Crow, you signed the paper." Murmurs spread again. Some men laughed. Others spat on the floor. Atsa spoke, her English firm but cold. "No man owns me, but I keep promise." Her words cut through the noise like a blade. Tobias swallowed hard. "Then I'll keep mine too," he said quietly. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying dust and the echo of laughter. Two strangers, bound by a foolish bet and the cruelty of others, walked out of Dry Creek together. The sunset burned behind them, painting their shadows long and uncertain. No one in town thought they'd last a day, but destiny had other plans. The desert swallowed sound. Only the wind spoke, whispering through the sage and brittle grass. Tobias Crow walked beside the woman who now, by law and luck, bore his name. She moved like the earth itself, heavy, calm, and proud. Her shadow stretched long against the sand. Behind them, Dry Creek shimmered. In the dying light, a smudge of smoke and laughter disappearing into the horizon. Tobias had never been a man for company, but tonight, the silence between him and Atsa felt heavier than any crowd. "Do you even know where you're going?" he asked. "Yes." Her voice was low, deliberate. He waited, but she said no more. The night cooled fast. Tobias stopped near a dry riverbed and began gathering sticks. Atsa stood nearby, arms crossed, watching him. He could feel her gaze, not judgmental, just cautious. When he struck a match, the light flared between them, painting her face in copper and shadow. "You don't talk much," he said. "You talk too much," she answered flatly. He chuckled quietly. "Guess we'll balance each other out." For a long while, neither spoke. The fire cracked and spit. Above them, the sky opened wide, black velvet, crowded with stars. Tobias thought of his ranch, empty now, maybe already taken by another man. Everything he'd worked for had turned to dust. All that remained was a paper contract and a stranger beside him. Atsa sat across the fire, sharpening a knife she had hidden beneath her belt. The blade caught the light, flashing red gold. Tobias tried not to stare. "You planning to use that?" "Only if someone needs teaching." He smiled faintly. "Hope you're not looking at me." Her eyes lifted, cool and steady. "Not yet." He leaned back, the fire warming his boots. "You're something else? You know that." Atsa didn't answer, but he thought, just for a moment. He saw the corner of her mouth twitch. As the wind rose, carrying the scent of rain, Tobias felt a strange peace settle in. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about tomorrow, just the fire, the stars, and the woman across from him, a woman who didn't belong to anyone. When he finally drifted to sleep, the world was quiet, But Atsa didn't rest. She sat awake, staring toward the west, where 3 distant lanterns flickered like watchful eyes. She whispered something in Apache, words lost to the wind. Then she reached for her knife and waited for dawn. The sun broke over the desert like spilled fire. Tobias woke to the sound of hooves, faint, distant, but real. Atsa was already standing, her face turned to the ridge, her hand gripping the knife she never let far from reach. "They've been following since night," she said quietly. Tobias rose fast, brushing sand off his coat. "Who?" She didn't answer, just pointed. Far out across the plain, 3 riders cut through the dust. The glint of rifles caught the light. Tobias's stomach turned cold. "You know them." Her jaw tightened. "Men who sold me. They come to claim again." The weight of her words hung in the morning air. Tobias reached for his revolver, old, worn, but loaded. "They're after you?" he asked. Her gaze met his, unflinching. "They think I'm property. And now so are you." They packed in silence. The fire was crushed under sand. Within minutes, they were riding hard west toward the canyon line. The desert wind tore at their faces, grit bit into their eyes. Behind them, the riders grew larger. Tobias' wrist glanced back. "We can't outrun them forever." Atsa didn't slow. "Then we don't." "What do you mean?" She pulled the reins sharply, turning her horse toward the canyon mouth. "We fight where the land remembers us." The canyon walls swallowed them, red and narrow like an open wound. The sound of hooves echoed, close now to close. Tobias slid from his saddle and took position behind a rock. He could hear the traders shouting, laughing, confident. Atsa moved like a ghost between the stones, setting her stance, bow in hand. "You shoot?" she asked. Tobias cocked his revolver. "I shoot, then shoot true." The first rider appeared at the bend, his grin bright in the sun. A crack split the air. Tobias fired once. The man fell from his horse. 2 more came past, shouting, returning fire. Bullets sparked off stone. Atsa released an arrow, silent, deadly. It found its mark clean through the chest. Then quiet, only wind and the smell of gunpowder. Tobias leaned against a rock, breathing hard. His hands trembled. You've done this before." Atsa's face was calm, enough to survive. They searched the fallen men, finding food, water, and a half-burned contract, her name scrawled across it in crooked ink. Tobias looked at it, then at her. "Guess that's the paper that made you mine." She tore it in 2. "Paper doesn't own me." He watched her walk away, the torn pieces drifting into the wind. Something inside him shifted, not fear, not pity, something deeper. For the first time, Tobias Crow realized he hadn't won a prize in some cruel game. He'd been given a mirror. As dusk settled, they rode again side by side, to silhouettes against a bleeding sky. Somewhere ahead lay freedom, or death, but either way, it would be their choice. The desert stretched endlessly before them, painted in hues of gold and rust. Each step sent a small cloud of dust swirling around Tobias's boots. His throat was dry, his shirt clung to him, and yet, beside him, Atsa walked like a figure carved from the earth itself, unbroken, silent, her gaze fixed on the horizon. They had been traveling for 3 days without shelter, the last town they left behind with whispers and stares. A white man and a giant Apache woman. Tobias heard someone mutter before they rode off. He tried to laugh it away, but the sound died in his throat. Now, in the barren valley, those words echoed again, heavier this time. Atsa suddenly stopped. She knelt beside a cluster of rocks and touched one of them, a circle carved by human hands long ago. Her eyes softened. "My people called this place Tashinkai, the Valley of the Dead Wind," she said quietly. "Spirits travel here when they cannot find peace." Tobias swallowed. "And you believe they're still around?" She turned to him, her expression unreadable. "They never left." For a moment, Tobias thought he saw something flicker in her gaze, sorrow, or maybe memory. He sat beside her, brushing sand from his hat. "You talk like you've been here before." "I was," he said, "as a child. My mother brought me here to teach me the names of the stars. Then, the white men came. They said they wanted peace. They took her first. The silence between them thickened like smoke. Tobias didn't know what to say. His words always felt small next to her truth. Atsa rose and looked around. We must move. The wind will turn soon. But before they could take another step, Tobias noticed something on the ridge, a glint of metal, a rifle. He grabbed Atsa's arm and pulled her down behind a rock. 3 riders appeared, silhouettes against the burning sky. One of them shouted, "We know you're down there, half-breed lovers. The woman belongs to us." Tobias felt his heart pounding. Atsa's face hardened, not with fear, but fury. She pulled a small blade from her belt. "They followed us from the town," she muttered. "Traitors. They want to take me back." Tobias clenched his jaw. "Over my dead body." Atsa looked at him for a long moment, then nodded once. "Then stand ready." The wind shifted, carrying sand and the smell of gunpowder. The first shot rang out, sharp and cruel, echoing across the valley. Tobias ducked behind a boulder, returning fire. Atsa moved like a shadow, fast and precise, her strength unleashed in silence. The desert roared alive, and the valley of the dead wind claimed new souls. The echo of gunfire faded into the wind. Smoke drifted across the valley, curling like spirits searching for breath. Tobias pressed his back to the rock, reloading his rifle with trembling hands. "How many do you think?" he hissed. Atsa crouched beside him, eyes sharp. 3, maybe 4. But the desert hides more than shadows. Another shot cracked the air. The bullet ricocheted off the stone inches from Tobias's ear. He winced but didn't pull away. Atsa rose slightly, gauging the direction. Her tall frame half silhouetted against the burning sky. "They'll try to flank us," she murmured. "Stay behind me." He wanted to argue, to insist he could protect her. But when she stepped forward, blade glinting in the light, her presence silenced him. There was something in the way she moved. Precise, powerful, calm. Tobias realized then that fear had no home in her. 2 riders charged from the left ridge. Tobias aimed, fired. One fell. The other turned, raising his pistol. Before the man could pull the trigger, Atsa was already there. She moved like lightning, slashing the reins, pulling the man down, her knife flashing once. The sound that followed was swallowed by the wind. Tobias stared. You killed him." Atsa didn't answer. She stood over the fallen man, breathing slowly, her hair whipped by the desert gusts. "He would have taken us both," she said at last. Her tone was flat, not cold, just final. When the last shot echoed and silence returned, Tobias stepped out, scanning the ridge. The traitors were gone. Only dust and spent shells remained. The sun hung low, bleeding into the horizon. Atsa knelt beside the fire she lit from a spark stone. The smoke rose thin and gray. Tobias sat across from her, his heart still pounding. "You've done this before," he said quietly. She nodded. Too many times, her eyes reflected the flames, bright, wounded, alive. "They sold me when I was 15. Said I wasn't worth keeping because I fought too hard." Tobias said nothing. The flames cracked between them. He reached out slowly, touching her wrist. For a moment, she didn't move. Then she looked at him, and in her gaze was something fierce yet fragile, the kind of strength born only from loss. "The wind's changing," she whispered. "Tomorrow, we'll reach the canyon. After that, no man will follow us." Tobias stared into the fire. "Then tomorrow, we start over." Atsa's lips curved into the faintest smile. "If the land allows it." Above them, the desert sky deepened into indigo. Stars began to bloom, countless, ancient, silent. The valley of the dead wine slept again, but beneath its surface, something new had taken root, not just survival, but trust. By noon the next day, the desert began to change. The flat, endless sand gave way to sharp cliffs and scarred stone. The wind howled through narrow passages like the cry of something ancient and unseen. Atsa stopped, raising her hand. "We're close," she said. "The canyon of forgotten voices." Tobias squinted against the glare. Why do they call it that? Because, she answered softly, when the wind blows just right, it sounds like the dead are speaking. They led their horses down a steep trail, each step crunching on gravel and bone-dry earth. The canyon opened wide before them, a maze of red rock and shadow carved by time itself. Tobias had seen many places in his years as a ranch hand, but nothing like this. The air felt sacred, as if the ground carried memory. Atsa moved with reverence. She touched the walls as they walked, whispering words in her language. Tobias watched, saying nothing. He felt like an intruder in a place too old for him. They reached a small plateau where a spring trickled between stones. Atsa knelt, cupping the water in her hands. "Drink," she said. "It will keep you safe here." Tobias obeyed, the water cold and sweet. As they rested, she began to hum, low, steady, like the heartbeat of the canyon itself. The sound seemed to awaken something around them. The wind shifted, faint echoes rippled through the cliffs, carrying fragments of long-forgotten voices. Tobias froze. "What is that?" Atsa's eyes glowed faintly in the dim light. "My ancestors," she whispered. "They watch those who walk with purpose, and they curse those who walk in greed." He shivered, though the air was warm. For the first time, Tobias felt the full weight of what she carried, not just strength, but centuries of silence and pain. As dusk approached, they built a small fire near the edge of the canyon. Tobias leaned back, gazing at the stars. "You ever think about leaving all this behind? The memories, the past?" Atsa's gaze remained on the fire. "If I leave it behind, who am I? The world took my name once. I won't let it take my soul." Her words struck him harder than he expected. He stared at her, at the firelight dancing across her face, at the quiet pride in her eyes, and something inside him shifted. "You're not what I expected," he said softly. Atsa looked at him, a trace of a smile ghosting across her lips. "Neither are you." The canyon wind rose again, whispering through the cliffs, the voices blending into something almost like a song. For a moment, they both listened. In that sound, Tobias didn't hear the dead. He heard something else. Hope. Night fell like a curtain of velvet across the canyon. The fire burned low, its glow flickering against the stone walls, turning them into shifting ghosts. Tobias lay awake, listening to the distant sound of wind rushing through the narrow passes. It almost sounded like voices, too faint to understand, yet impossible to ignore. Atsa sat across from him, sharpening her blade by the light. Her movements were deliberate, rhythmic, steady. "You should sleep," she said without looking up. "I can't," Tobias admitted. "Feels like the canyon's watching." She paused, glancing toward the cliffs. "It is?" Before he could ask what she meant, the horses snorted nervously. Their ears twitched. Atsa rose instantly, her expression turning hard. Tobias reached for his rifle. The sound came again, a faint clatter of rock. Then another. From the darkness, 3 figures appeared, their outlines tall and lean, faces half hidden under hoods. One of them raised a torch, the light revealing bone necklaces and painted hands. Tobias's heart pounded. "Apache," he whispered. Atsa shook her head. "Outcasts. Those who serve no tribe." The strangers spoke in low tones, their eyes fixed on Atsa. One stepped forward, his voice harsh. "You should not be here, daughter of fire. This place belongs to the dead." Atsa's jaw tightened. "The dead do not own what they cannot protect." The man sneered. "Then you defy them. You bring a white man into sacred ground." Tobias felt the weight of their stares, judgment, anger, disbelief. He wanted to speak, to explain, but Atsa lifted her hand. "He walks with me. His blood carries no greed." The outcast laughed. "No greed? Then why does he still breathe on stolen land?" In one swift motion, Atsa stepped between Tobias and the men. Her height dwarfed them all. "Because he fights beside me. And if the spirits disapprove, they will take him themselves." For a long moment, silence ruled the canyon. Then the leader lowered his torch. "You are bold, Atsa of the Red Wind. The valley has not forgotten you." He looked at Tobias. Nor has it forgiven his kind. Without another word, the men vanish into the darkness, their footsteps swallowed by stone. Tobias exhaled shakily. Who were they? Atsa sat back by the fire. The lost ones, warriors who refused peace. They hate what they cannot understand. He looked at her face, the firelight glinting off her eyes. And you, what do you understand about me? Atsa hesitated. The wind whistled between them. Enough to know you don't run anymore. Her words hung there, quiet but sharp. Tobias met her gaze, realizing for the first time that somewhere along this brutal road, his fear had turned into something else, something he couldn't yet name. The canyon sighed as the fire died. In the darkness, they sat side by side, not speaking. Above them, the stars pulsed bright. Against the endless sky, silent witnesses. To two souls learning that survival wasn't just about living. It was about belonging. Dawn spilled across the canyon like liquid gold. The fire had burned to ash, leaving only thin ribbons of smoke that curled into the cold morning air. Atsa was the first to rise. She stretched silently, her silhouette catching the pale light, muscles drawn tight beneath worn leather. Tobias stirred beside her, groaning softly. Time to move, she said. He rubbed his eyes, blinking at the crimson horizon. Feels like we just closed them. The desert doesn't wait for the weary, Atsa replied, fastening her belt and checking her blade. They packed in silence and led their horses out of the canyon. The cliffs rose like walls behind them, silent, watching. Tobias turned once to look back. The canyon seemed smaller now, almost peaceful, as if it had given them permission to leave. The land ahead was wide and wild, rolling dunes and broken stones stretching to the horizon. By midday, heat shimmered off the ground like glass. Tobias wiped sweat from his brow. Remind me again why we're walking straight into the sun. Atsa gave a faint smile. Because west is freedom, and freedom burns brighter than comfort. Her words hung in the air. He didn't know whether to admire her or fear her for saying them so easily. As the day wore on, they found traces of others, a broken wagon wheel, boot prints, bones half buried in sand. Tobias crouched to study them. Travelers. Atsa shook her head. Hunters, the kind who sell people. The thought made his stomach twist. He'd heard of slavers roaming these lands, rounding up natives and drifters alike for border trade. He looked at her. We'll avoid them. Her tone turned grave. No, we'll confront them if we must. Some chains must be broken in the open. By the time the sun began to fall, the desert cooled and the wind turned sharp. They stopped near a cluster of stones that formed a natural shelter. Tobias built a small fire while Atsa stood watch. When he looked up, she was gazing west again, her face unreadable. You ever think of going back? He asked. To what? She said quietly. There's nothing left behind me. Tobias hesitated, then nodded. Guess we're both ghosts then. She turned to him, her eyes softening. No, ghosts wander without purpose. We walked toward one. For a long moment, the silence between them was warm, not empty, but alive. The flames danced between their faces, casting shadows that looked almost like hands reaching out. Tobias didn't move. He didn't need to. For the first time since they'd met, the air between them felt like something close to peace. But peace never lasted long on this land. Somewhere beyond the dunes, a distant sound broke the stillness, a horse's whinny, sharp and startled. Atsa's head snapped up. Her hand went to her knife. They found us, she said. The sound grew louder, hooves pounding across the sand, metal clinking faintly in rhythm. Tobias's pulse quickened. He kicked dirt over the fire, plunging them into half-darkness. Atsa crouched low, eyes flashing amber in the moonlight. From the ridge came silhouettes, 5 riders, rough and lean, rifles slung over their shoulders. The leader, a man with a red bandana and a scar running from his lip to his ear, reined in his horse and grinned down at them. Well, he drawled. The lost cowboy and his prize. Tobias stepped forward, hand near his gun. You're trespassing. The man laughed. These lands don't belong to anyone, least of all a man hiding behind an Apache woman. Atsa's voice was calm, but carried steel. Leave, now. He tilted his head. You must be Atsa. Heard a lot about you. Big talk about the giant girl who thinks she's a warrior. The insult barely left his mouth before she moved. One fluid motion, a blur of muscle and fury. She grabbed his leg and yanked him clean off his horse, slamming him into the dirt. The others shouted, raising their rifles. Tobias fired first, the shot echoing off the rocks. One man fell. Another turned tail. The night exploded into chaos, horses screaming, sand flying, gunfire flashing like lightning. Tobias ducked behind a boulder, reloading, while Atsa waded into the fight with primal grace. She caught a man's rifle mid-swing and snapped it in two. Her strength unbelievable. When the last rider fell silent, only the sound of wind and heavy breathing remained. Tobias looked around, heart hammering. You all right? Atsa wiped blood from her cheek, then nodded. They were scouts. More will come. Tobias knelt beside the scarred leader, who was still alive but fading. Who sent you? The man spat into the sand. The buyer said you've got what belongs to him. His gaze flicked toward Atsa, then died out like a snuff flame. They buried the bodies before dawn. Neither spoke much. When the first light touched the desert, Atsa stood over the graves and whispered something in her tongue, a prayer or perhaps a curse. Tobias packed the horses, glancing at her. You didn't have to fight like that. She looked at him, eyes fierce. I don't fight because I have to. I fight because I remember. They rode west in silence. The air was cooler now, the wind gentle. Tobias watched her from behind, her shoulders broad, her hair loose, her presence filling the world around her. He realized then that she was more than the legend people whispered about. She was the living truth of this land, wild, scarred, and untamed. When night fell again, they camped by a dry riverbed. Tobias sat beside her, the stars reflected in her eyes. You ever think freedom's just another word? He asked. She smiled faintly. No, freedom's breath. You just forget to breathe sometimes. He looked at her for a long time, and in the hush between them, the desert didn't seem so empty anymore. The sun bled red over the ridges, painting the sky in fire. Tobias and Atsa rode silently, their shadows stretching long over the cracked earth. The desert was quiet now, too quiet. Even the coyotes seemed to sense something was coming. By noon, they found refuge beneath an ancient stone arch that rose from the ground like a gateway to another world. Atsa dismounted, her feet silent on the dust. Tobias followed, watching her trace the rock surface with her hand. Symbols, old Apache carvings, covered it like forgotten prayers. My people carved these before the wars, she said quietly, before they were forced to sell their names for food. Tobias ran his fingers over the same lines, rough beneath his skin. You talked like you were there. She smiled faintly. Sometimes I think I was. The stories stay inside you, even when the world tries to take them away. They built a small fire and shared the last of their rations, dry beans and coffee bitter enough to sting. The silence between them wasn't awkward anymore. It was something sacred. Tobias found himself stealing glances at her, the way her hair caught the light, the way she moved with quiet certainty, as if the land itself breathed with her. Then, from beyond the ridge, came the sound, drums. Slow, steady, distant. Atsa froze, her face tightening. That's not raiders, he said. That's my people. Before Tobias could speak, riders appeared, 6 of them, all Apache, their faces painted in red and black. At their head rode a woman nearly as tall as Atsa, her expression a mix of sorrow and command. Atsa stepped forward. Sister, the woman said, you left us in anger. I left in chains, Atsa replied, and I won't wear them again. The woman dismounted, removing a small pouch from her belt. The elders sent me. Your debt has been paid. The man who sold you is dead. You are free, Atsa. Tobias felt the words like a blow. Free, It should have been a victory, but the way Atsa stood, still, unreadable, told him this was not freedom easily taken. The woman's gaze shifted toward him. But freedom has a price. If you go back to the white man, they'll call you traitor. If you stay with him, you can never return to us. Atsa looked between them, her eyes like storm clouds. And if I go back, then your name is restored, the woman said softly, and he dies. Tobias's breath caught. His hand instinctively moved toward his revolver. But Atsa raised a hand, calm, steady. No. The wind howled through the canyon, carrying dust and silence. For the first time, Tobias saw fear in her, not for herself, but for him. She turned to her sister. Tell the elders this. I will not trade one cage for another. The woman nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. Then may the desert take what's left of you. She turned her horse and rode away, her warriors following without another word. When the sound of hoofs faded, Tobias finally exhaled. Atsa. She didn't look at him. Freedom, she whispered. Night fell fast that evening, as if the desert itself wanted to bury the day's memories. Tobias and Atsa camped without fire. The stars stretched endless above them, sharp, cold, indifferent. Tobias sat with his rifle across his knees, staring into the dark. You could have gone back, he said softly. You would have been safe. Atsa shook her head. Safety isn't freedom. You taught me that. He gave a tired laugh. I'm not sure I ever believed it myself. For a long while, only the wind spoke. Then, the faint jingle of metal. Horses again. Atsa rose instantly, her hand gripping her spear. From the shadows, a dozen riders emerged. The slavers returned for vengeance. Their leader, a heavy man with a broad head and a cruel grin, lifted a lantern. Well, look here, he sneered. The giant and her pet cowboy. Should have sold you both when I had the chance. Tobias stood, calm but ready. You're not taking her. The man smirked. I'm taking everything. The desert exploded. Gunfire flashed. Horses screamed. Tobias rolled behind a fallen log, firing blind into the chaos. Atsa charged into the storm, her body cutting through the firelight like a living myth, unstoppable, furious. She grabbed one slaver and threw him clear off his saddle. Another lunged with a knife, but she caught his wrist and twisted until bones snapped. Tobias, she shouted, as a bullet grazed her shoulder. He sprinted to her side, dragging her behind a rock. Blood seeped down her arm, dark and thick. They'll circle us, Tobias said. We can't stay. Atsa's eyes burned like embers. Then we end it here. She pushed herself up before he could stop her. The slavers closed in, circling like wolves. Tobias joined her, revolver in hand. And for a moment, just a heartbeat, the two of them stood shoulder to shoulder. Small man and towering woman, defying the whole damn desert. When the last bullet fired, silence fell heavy as ash. Smoke drifted through the moonlight. Around them lay only bodies and dust. Tobias dropped his gun, hands trembling. Atsa leaned on him, her breathing shallow. Don't you die on me, he whispered. She smiled faintly. Not yet. They stayed like that until dawn, the sun rising crimson over the battlefield. When its first light touched her face, she stood again broken. Where will we go? Tobias asked. Atsa looked west, toward the horizon. Where no one owns the land, where no one owns us. He took her hand, rough, strong, warm. Then that's home. They rode together until the desert opened into green. Hills, water, the faint promise of a settlement. People stopped and stared as the giant Apache woman and her cowboy passed. Side by side, silent but proud. For the first time in his life, Tobias didn't feel alone. And when he glanced at her, he saw not a prize or a burden, but a partner, a force of nature who had chosen him against every law of man and tribe. That night, as the stars returned, Atsa whispered, "You won more than a lottery, cowboy.